Russia would take over the entire Ukraine, becoming even more powerful. Meanwhile, a huge war would break out in Israel, and with the United States helping them, they would be able to take over the entire Middle East. Africa would become more powerful too, since Nigeria would become one of the strongest countries in the world, taking over majority of the continent. In North America, a war would break out between Canada and the United States, which would end up in Canada surrendering and becoming a part of the US. They would also invade Greenland, which they would be able to take over. However, this would crush their relations with Europe, as they would get kicked out of NATO. In South America, huge chances would happen, as Uruguay and Chile would join Argentina, while the rest of the continent would unite with Brazil. Europe would be a single country, with many European countries joining in the past, while some of them would be conquered by the European Union. Russia wouldn't exist anymore, as they would lose to Europe and China, who would beat them and split their territories. In Asia, tensions would be at all-time high, since China would take Korea and Japan, while India would expand westward, forming the strongest army in history, with 5 billion soldiers. In Africa, the continent would be split in two parts, with Arab Empire in the north and Bantuland in the south, who would constantly fight for domination over the continent. In the Americas, Canada would become the part of the US, as well as the northern parts of Mexico, who would now be called Valora and would take the whole Central America for themselves. In the south, Brazil would become a dominant force, taking the northern part of the continent. However, the US would have a huge influence, as the rest of the countries would become their puppet states, led by North Argentina, who would be created to expand the US influence and destroy the Brazilian Empire in the future. In Europe, Denmark would use the resources in Greenland and would become one of the richest countries in the world. With that, they would create a strong army, soon conquering the north part of the Europe. Italy would also shock the world, as they would take European countries one by one, soon conquering the other half of Europe. In Asia, China would be able to take control and would even beat the wounded Russians too. However, Japan would shock everyone, as they would ambush China and take control of the entire Asia pretty soon. In Africa, people would be more peaceful, resulting only in countries like South Africa, Egypt, and Algeria, expanding a little bit. In the Americas, real chaos would start, since the United States would successfully annex Canada, while Mexicans would take the entire Central America. Brazil and Argentina would form the biggest alliance in the world, as they would split the continent between themselves and prepare to take on the United States. What will the United States would take both Canada and Mexico, becoming even more powerful. However, with the multi-century war, China would finally be able to beat them, taking control of the entire North America. In Asia, both Russia and China would dominate over the years, taking the entire Asia, except for India. However, Chinese would betray them, easily beating them and all of their territory. India would be able to fight back and free some of the Asian countries, but since their armies would be around 10 billion each, their fight would be on for hundreds of years. Africa would also become a superpower, as they would become a single country, and one of the strongest in the world too. They would beat every single European country, one by one, and they would become their puppet state, with Italy and France leading them. South America would be the only one who would keep their independence, as they would side with the Chinese in their conquest of America and would be their biggest allies. United States wouldn't exist, as the AI would take their entire territory, and after some time, even the entire North America. Not a single human would live there, since the AI forces would drive out every single one of them. In the South America, Brazil would take over the entire continent first, but with the rise of the AI, would accept all human refugees, as they would all fight against the robots. However, in Europe, aliens would come, and after a long series of fights between them and the humans, aliens would be able to take over the entire continent, which would become the first alien republic on Earth. Africa wouldn't last long either, since the aliens would also be able to beat the humans and colonize the entire continent. In the Asia, Russia and China would fight over the dominance over the continent, and even though Russia would win, things would soon chance. With AI and aliens attacking, they would all agree on a peace deal, letting Asia become a free continent where humans, aliens, and AI can live in peace.